Because of the following special program, Mr. Merlin will not be presented this evening.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suttress here. Very happy to welcome the writer of Blue Beetle, and we're getting ready for a pretty cool episode, and that's going to be issue number 7. Here, I got the cover right here. And it's going to be a special tribute to Keith Giffen, but also a really cool story, Where is Ted Cord? But we're going to go into the details now with the writer of Blue Beetle. It's Josh Trujillo. Josh, you've got your microphone muted, just so you know. And so we'll let you do that.
There we go. Hi there.
No problem.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no, it's really nice to meet you, man. You were flattering me off the air, which is always a good way to start with me. And letting me know that you're a longtime Word Balloon listener. And I really appreciate that, man. Thank you.
No, of course. Like I was saying, I used to listen to the Bendis tapes you were doing way back. Like, I don't even want to say what year it was, but it was when he was doing New Avengers and stuff. And so it took me about 5 hours to get to my internship and get back. I'd listened to the whole Bendis tape in one sitting, basically, or 2 sittings, I guess. But like that stuff was like my lifeblood, like downloading them on my little iPod mini and then putting the cassette in the car so I could listen to it. And like I had to delete old podcasts because the iPod could only hold so many, all that stuff. So it's a real full circle moment for me to get to be on Word Balloon.
Hey, man, it's my pleasure, and I'm glad you've been listening that long. And you're killing it, man, on Blue Beetle. I've enjoyed it. Before we get to Blue Beetle and what's going on with Jaime and Ted and a bunch of new characters, or at least new to me, because it's been a while since I've really paid attention to what's happening with Jaime. What comic book writing have you done leading up to Blue Beetle?
Yeah, so let's see. I've done Rick and Morty. I co-created the Aaron Fisher Captain America character for the United States of Captain America. I've done Hulkling and Wiccan. I've done. I have a original graphic novel that's a history one called Washington's Gay General that came out in August. It's a nonfiction. It's a true story. It's weird. And then honestly, just bits and pieces. I did Adventure Time graphic novels. That's where I got started. I'm very much a working creator. You know what I mean? I like to do a little bit of everything.
Sounds like it, and that's fantastic. And a lot of my favorites are in there. I'm a big Captain America fan, and I love Rick and Morty. That's cool. Tell me about this is still to come later this year, Washington's Gay General?
Oh, no, that came out in August, actually. I'm doing
August.
I would have to keep it here. So, of course, I got to plug it.
Let me zoom in. Hold on, man.
Oh, sure. This is
there we go.
Yeah, so, me and Levi Hastings.
Cool. And listen, I'm a complete sucker for American history. Tell me about Washington's Gay General.
Yeah, so it's funny because it's President's Day, but so, not on purpose. But in the Revolutionary War, George Washington had a general that served under him named von Steuben, and Baron von Steuben. He really turned things around in Valley Forge. He kind of taught the American military how to go from being like farmers and craftspeople to becoming an army and taking on the biggest superpower in the world at the time, which was Britain. And he came from Prussia. So it kind of follows his life starting in Prussia, which is totally unrecognizable to any Germany we know today. And him fighting through the 7 Years' War. He was a prisoner of the Russians. He got injured in battle left and right. He trained under Frederick the Great. And then he came to America, like in his, I think, 40s. And then his life really began here. And he kind of became like the most important general, honestly, probably next to like, Patton or something. He's up there. But he's kind of relatively unknown today. He really is a founding father, but he doesn't get talked about very much. And so he is known in military circles. They still teach the handbook that he co-wrote, the Blue Book training manual that he created during the revolutionary times. So they still teach that at like West Point. But like beyond that, you don't really hear much about him. So me and the illustrator, Levi Hastings, we wanted to do a deep dive of his life. And, you know, not the most interesting part about him, but he was queer. You know, we can't necessarily say if he would say he's bi or gay or whatever, because those terms didn't exist then. But we kind of see all the calling cards are there, right? And so we do an exploration of his life kind of through that point of view. And we really find a lot of like interesting figures from that era, like, you know, like lesbian couples or women who fought as men in the Revolutionary War, or like non-binary people, and like just like all these people from history. There's a big misconception that like Stonewall happened and suddenly there were homosexual people.
Right. In 69. Yeah. The New York thing. Absolutely.
And
yeah.
So we've always here, but there's a million circumstances why you don't know about it. And so this is fun to peel off the layers and be like, we were here too. And not only that, like we were big. We made a big difference.
That's awesome, man. No, that's fantastic. Hey, listen, I'm a Greek guy, and 4,000 years ago, we had a lot of gay people in Greek culture. So certainly, that's okay. That's terrific, man. Excellent. That reminds me, and forgive me, I hope this isn't rude, but like I asked Brad Meltzer years ago, what's the biggest persisting rumor historically that you always get? And he's like, oh, that Lincoln was gay. Yeah. And it's like, and I'm like, wow, it would never occur to me that people would make that assumption. But also there was that whole thing of, you got to remember, this is like, the 19th century, and everyone's in like these wood structures of houses outside of the fireplace that might be in a room or whatever. There were people that were sleeping together literally for work, so not to exclude the gay people that absolutely were there as well. Sure. But yeah, so that fascinated me. So there you go.
No, there's a lot to explore with Lincoln. There's probably a book, maybe there's another book there. We'll see. But, he's an interesting character. He's hopelessly depressed. He hated his wife in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And he had a lot of affection for the men in his life, but we can't necessarily parse what is romance, a sexuality, This is what we ran into with the Gay General book. It's hard to say that he really was the gay general. But if you look at the founding fathers, like the way they wrote to each other with these flowery, poetic letters that went on for pages and pages and pages. And so it's really like, how do you parse that? And how do you explore that? And how do you make that feel like they're a real person? So that was the challenge. And like, we're going to talk about, I'm sure, some of the homework I had to do for Blue Beetle, but that was nothing like this. I spent about 4 years writing this thing.
Wow. And who published the Washington?
This is through an imprint called Shirley.
Shirley?
Yeah, Shirley Books under Abrams.
Abrams. Okay, great. All right, you cut out for a second. But all right, very cool. So Abrams Books, their Shirley division, and Washington's Gay General, among the other books that Josh has written. That's fantastic. Very cool, man. All right, here's some comments from the Peanut Gallery. Vengeance, loving Blue Beetle.
Thank you, Vengeance.
Keep up the amazing work. Very cool. And yes, Stanley, we're going to get to it. I promise you. Lego Monster 21. I'm loving Blue Beetle. What about the character drew you to write for him?
Gosh, where do I start? I was reading Justice League International reprints. Probably I think I went straight from Kingdom Come, which was in a lot of ways my first DC book. And I went straight from there and I was like, I want to learn more about this universe. And so I went to the dollar bins. I got all these, Giffen, DeMatteis, McGuire books. And it's like, oh, I didn't realize comics could be funny. I thought they were all kind of self-serious. And you look, I'm like, oh, in the Sunday Funnies, that's the funny comics. And the comic books are like Spawn, right? And so I didn't realize you could do that with the format. And so that was like my window to the world. So like Ted Kord Blue Beetle was my first because Jaime didn't even exist then. And so for Jaime, he was on a trading card game that I was playing pretty obsessively called Versus System, like a Marvel versus DC card game. And so Coley Hammer did the art for the card, and I was like, who's this guy? I know who the Blue Beetle is, Ted Kord, but who's this Blue Beetle? And that was all during like Infinite Crisis and Countdown to Infinite Crisis and all this stuff. So like I just caught up on like I felt like the perfect moment to onboard into the DC universe was like Infinite Crisis, Seven Soldiers, 52, all that stuff. And you can definitely tell if you read by Blue Beetle, like, oh, this guy read a lot of comics in the early 2000s.
Hey, that's awesome, man. And seriously, in Blue Beetle, I love the fact, and I know that the Scarab connects Dan Garrett to Jaime, and of course, that, you know, and the way that they've also folded Ted into the current Blue Beetle comic. I'm a sucker for Ted Kord, or rather I love Ted Kord. That was the first Beetle that I encountered, and it was through Charlton reprints of the Beetle stuff from the 60s. And it was really great to learn all that. And even in that origin of Ted Kord, there's Dan Garrett and the Secret of Pogo Island and all this crazy stuff. And it's like, what the hell's that mean? And then, you know, oh my God, wait a minute, there was another Blue Beetle before Ted Kord. So then I really got into Dan Garrett. And then, you know, I literally just had my buddy Chris Irving on, comic historian, who is doing a couple different projects on Victor Fox, the original publisher of Blue Beetle comics. And, you know, I'm fascinated by all that. And so we talked a lot about Dan Garrett. Then I'm reading your run, and I'm so glad, because it always kind of bumps me out. And maybe as the writer, you know the answer to this, how much or how little they write about Dan Garrett. You know, Chris Irving said, you know, how many fans of Dan Garrett are there? I mean, he was kind of, by today's terms, he's not a Golden Age character that has endured, which is ironic because when he was brand new, he certainly was out there, and certainly Victor Fox and company, they had a radio show, a syndicated radio show. I mean, they did everything they could to promote the idea of Blue Beetle. But do you know, before we get into more of the nitty-gritty of your run, where is, like, what the DC philosophy of using Dan Garrett Blue Beetle is?
You know, no one gave me any real guidelines on it. I think they were surprised as anyone that I wanted to use as much Dan stuff as I did, because I was reading the same reprints to do research for the Scarab War arc, the first arc we had. And, you know, I think the Blue Beetle book's all about legacy. And in the Giffen Rogers run of Blue Beetle with Jaime, they play up, they reference it a few times, but they don't really get into like the specifics of the stories, because they're like, well, who remembers this story from 60 years ago? Well, I do for some reason. So I wanted to make a real connection between Dan Garrett, his Rogues Gallery, and Jaime. And like, I want to feel like if it's a legacy book, we really are paying off people who are reading the old stuff. And every issue I try to do a reading guide and like, just like, hey, you can get a lot of this stuff on the DC app now too.
Oh, that's good. Even the really, really old.
I don't know about that. I've definitely been on some weird Lithuanian comic websites to read some of these reprints.
That's great, man.
The Ditko stuff's on the app.
Oh, okay, that's cool. And that makes sense, because certainly DC kind of grabbed all of Charlton's superhero assets and everything. So I can appreciate that. No, that's amazing. And also, I've loved in flashback in your run when it really becomes kind of really a Silver Age looking, flashback of a Dan Garrett moment and everything. I think those are great.
Oh man, our artist Adrian Gutierrez, my Blue Beetle brother, he drew the hell out of that. I was like, hey, do you want to like is it okay if you trace over this old page and like add some new panels? Can you match the style? He had it done in like 30 minutes. It looks like better than it originally printed. You know what I mean?
Oh, like 100%.
And so it's so cool to me. Like, you know, I got into DC in the 2000s, so I'm reading a lot of like Jeff Johns stuff, and he's always finding like little crevices and continuity and like little ways to like find a little more story there. And so I was like, I think I can do it here. Like, that was really exciting for me.
No, I agree. Lego Monster agrees. Dan Garrett flashbacks, unexpected, but I love them. Yeah, man. And again, I'm so glad that Ted is an integral part of where Jaime is right now. Where would you say, compared to other characters that started off as teenagers, is he in the Nightwing era of his development? Would you say he's still Teen Titan age? Where is Jaime as far as his age right now?
That's a question I get because with our first miniseries, we did Graduation Day, and we kind of age him up a little bit, right? We kick him out of high school, which is a big risk for teen characters. Like once they get into college, those stories don't get like Spider-Man pulled it off, but like other than that, it's really tricky to age up your characters like that. And so I was a little worried, but I just where was I going with this? He's probably like I say 18, 17 if you squint. He's definitely he's still a teen. As you know, in our Graduation Day arc, he kind of takes a leap year or skip year from college. He's not in college right now.
Right,
which
sure.
is so like he's in that vague age range.
Okay.
He's not drinking yet.
It took actually, and again, forgive me everybody, this is ancient history, but I'm ancient. So Dick Grayson did spend a lot of time at Hudson University. So, but he is a rare exception. I think of soap operas and, little kids will run up the stairs and they'll come back down and they're like mid-high school or whatever. So, yeah, I understand. I totally understand. Let's see. Lego Monster, my introduction to Blue Beetle was the Young Justice cartoon. I eventually grew to love Ted Kord and Dan Carrot because the first one behind me is my guy. Totally get it, man. Well, good Lord. This coming issue 7 is a tribute to Keith Giffen, which is just fantastic. And, Clark and the guys at DC gave me early access. So I have read this.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. March 12th.
That sounds right to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we were the first Tuesday of the month and now we're the second, I want to say, because the holiday bumped us.
I understand. Man, it's a great story. And I do love the mentorship of Ted Kord and where he is. The Scarab War was just fantastic, man. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And for people who haven't read it yet and maybe need to catch up, and I'm assuming this was your invention, this Red Scarab. Yeah. And I mean, really, like basically everybody like a Red Lantern version of the Beetle Scarab and the mythology. And it really does extrapolate even more of the mythology involving going back to Dan Garrett and an ancient villain of Dan Garrett's that suddenly confronts Jaime. And also you've introduced this Team Beetle kind of Scarab group and everything of characters, correct?
Yeah, for sure. We have, we get the whole, all the markers out, I guess, because we've got our yellow beetle, Dynastus, our green beetle, Natitha. They have their own individual names, but I know everyone's going to call them the yellow and the green beetle forever. Sure. That's fine. And then the villain you're talking about, we've got our blood scarab. So Jaime, Dynastus, our yellow beetle, Natitha, our green beetle, they all come from space. They're kind of offshoots of this conqueror alien empire known as the Reach. If you read the Jaime Reyes run, that's basically the whole thing. And so I wanted to do a little bit of twist of that because, as we know, Jaime's scarab Kaji Da is like magic as well as sci-fi. And so I was like, well, I don't want to do another alien tech. Let's go on the magic side. So I was looking up like, are there any old Dan Garrett magic villains? And as luck would have it, the first villain that Dan Garrett ever fought was this pharaoh that got they dropped a nuke on a pyramid, and then the mummy came alive and grew giant, and that's when Dan found the scarab. And it just sounds like a fever dream because it was. But we go back and we reveal, not to spoil too much. I guess we can spoil it, but this blood scarab has ties directly to that pharaoh that Dan Garrett fought in the 40s, I guess it was. And so that pharaoh, that Ka-F Ray, became the blood scarab. So people who are reading in 1940, I'm paying off that storyline finally. You're getting your due. Because I love connecting it. And so he's really the first Blue Beetle villain ever. And he's back. And now I think, except for the Reach and a few others, I think he's the best Blue Beetle villain out there.
You might have to do, because I love what Sheridan is doing with Alan Scott. And I love what Bob Vanetti is doing with Sandman and all the JSA spin-off books. Again, I think of Chris Irving, who's like, nobody wants it. Because the only three people, it seems now, including you, Josh, are me, you, and Chris, as far as wanting a Dan Garrett miniseries. So maybe down the road, you might have one full issue of a Dan Garrett saga.
Oh, I would love that. I'd love to do an annual or whatever. Whatever the crossover is. They're all fighting apes this month. Dan Garrett can fight an ape. I can do that. Like, what? You know what I mean? Like, get me in the room.
I hear you, man. No, God, I certainly hope so. Jay Splott. I hope I'm saying that right, Jay Splott. I love how you've interspersed your own journey into what's WGG.
Oh, Washington's Gay General.
Oh, excuse me. Of course. There you go. Was there anything research helped you better understand or contextualize? Was there a historical figure you really identified with? That's interesting.
Oh gosh. I'm not a historian by trade, so that was a real uphill battle for me. I love history. I listen to those like 20-hour long history podcasts, and like I live for that stuff. And like trying to get it right was the biggest challenge because I wrote most of it during a lockdown. And so I live on the West Coast. The plan was I was going to visit all these battlefields and talk to all these people in person. And what it ended up being was a lot of Zoom calls and like buying subscription to university libraries so I could get their materials online. And
Certainly.
like, so all that stuff. And like, I guess what I learned is like, history is kind of written often by like the first draft, and people just kind of bake it in. And it's like, if you actually go back to some of these sources and stuff, you're like, oh, well, actually, like that was just someone's conjecture. Like there's not a fact there, but we repeat it for hundreds of years, right? And then it becomes history.
Yep.
So that was kind of the interesting thing is like, history is fact-based, but also like it's interesting how people selectively choose the facts to tell their history.
I completely agree. Yeah, even in nerd comic book spheres,
absolutely.
A lot of time hearsay becomes the real history until thankfully you speak to somebody. This is what I always say. Again with Chris Irving, I just said it. I'm like, hey man, every fart since the 90s has been documented and on camera. So politicians can't get away from it. Other people can't get away from it. But there are these like little patches, I would say, starting even in the 80s and going backward, that it's like, no, you need to like dig to get the real story. Sometimes it's too late and you can't get the real story. So I appreciate it.
And for figures like for von Steuben, like, people who might have been considered queer back then, like, a lot of they didn't have family members who were close to them often. So their letters and the evidence of their lives was usually thrown away or destroyed by them intentionally because they didn't want anyone to find out.
Absolutely.
And so there's all this intentional and unintentional like loss of history. And there's this joke that like, there were 7 people in the Revolutionary War because they're the only ones we talk about. And like there's a reason for that. You know what I mean? Like those were the most literate men in the world, and they also had the biggest egos. And they made sure that every comma they wrote was going to be kept for hundreds of years. That's why when John Adams got all of his letters burned, it's like losing the Library of Alexandria for Revolutionary War fans.
So I hear you, man. David. I'm blanking. David McCullough, one of my favorite historians, and God, and again, just things that you take for granted. And one of my favorite final books of his was the Wright Brothers book. And it's called the Wright Brothers, but you also find out there was a Wright sister. And the 3 of them corresponded with each other.
I didn't know any of that.
Oh, it's again, thank God for historians, because you learn these fascinating things that you never would have if you just stuck with whatever your school curriculum was. And like you say, the founding fathers, there was like 7 guys. And no, of course not. And that's why it's terrific that you did this book. I think that's amazing.
It's funny. It's not funny. It's kind of sad, I guess. But like the reason we know about von Steuben is because of his like class, right? He was like a general, and he had this legacy behind him. And he had all these secretaries that documented his life. But like, for every von Steuben, there's like, we don't know how many gay soldiers there were in the American Revolution. We don't know if they got along with their families or if they were dating people, or we don't know any of that because they were all like largely like illiterate, basically, right? So we have no documentation of their lives. So like that's kind of like the tragedy of doing this kind of research, is how much we know we don't know.
Well, again, I'm glad you found this story and put it out there, and I think that's great. And I think hopefully there are others that are doing the same thing in other historical pursuits. So I absolutely appreciate that. Lego Monster joins our group and says, we have the Alan Scott and Sandman minis. Why not? And don't forget the Flash as well. Why not a Dan Garrett mini? Absolutely. And then also he asked, was Dan Garrett, after DC acquired the Charlton folk, ever put on the JSA? I think he'd be a perfect fit. Now, I know the answer to that, but I'll let you answer, Josh.
I think he's retconned by Jeff Johns as being like an auxiliary member or something, if I remember. But I might be wrong about that, because they did the Stargirl mini recently, and they reintroduced Dan Garrett's sidekick, Sparky. And so I was like, oh, that's a deep pull. I wasn't even going to use Sparky until he mentioned it, and I was like, okay, if Jeff can use Sparky, I'm in. Like,
all right, Josh, then you will confirm for me Sparky was a real Blue Beetle sidekick.
He was. I don't know if I've actually read a comic with Sparky in it. I've only read articles about Sparky.
Okay.
It's that wiki thing.
Because I think Jeff invented some of those sidekicks as well. I could be wrong.
Sparky is like a public domain character that was in the Fox comics, and I think DC Charlton and DC were like, we don't want him, and so I think he's back now under the DC. I don't know. So that's what happens when you go so far back with these characters. It's like, were they retconned, or who owns them, or like all this stuff.
When I first talked to Jeff about the Stargirl miniseries, and he did in the back of the first issue a lot of those DC Who's Who entries for a lot of the sidekicks. And I'm like, I don't know these characters. What are you talking about? And he's like, oh, John, you're letting me down. You're like one of my guys that I could, talk Golden Age and Silver Age with and knows what I'm talking about. And I felt so bad. I'm like, maybe I don't know as much as I thought I did. All right. And that's great to learn that Sparky was legitimately from Ted's or Dan's past and everything. I think that's great. It was always my understanding, and especially after in the 80s when they acquired all the Charlton properties, that going back that far and everything. And now why am I blanking? Roy Thomas, when he created the All-Star Squadron, you'd see a moment of Dan, or Dan would be in a big giant crowd scene. But it really seemed like, again, that's why I asked you initially. It seemed like for a long time DC was kind of avoiding Dan, and he'd only show up very, very briefly. So, and again, everybody, and you could certainly make that declaration, and I'm sure Jeff did, that certainly during the war years, if DC acquired the hero and stuff, that they were all considered, backup JSA members. But I know that was the point of the All-Star Squadron as well, was to go beyond the JSA and have the opportunity to tell World War II stories about some of these other Golden Age heroes, the Red Beam.
I mean, if Jeff ever wants to take an off week or something, I'm ready to get in there with the Dan Garrett JSA story in a heartbeat.
I'm so with you, man. No, that'd be great. Now, again, I'm a massive fan. I think he intrigues me. A lot of those Golden Age characters, the simplicity of the design of the uniform, but he had like interesting, in some cases, Superman-like powers, but also other powers as well, depending on the iteration of Dan. Before we I had
to answer one of those nerd questions that keep me up at night, because it's like Dan Garrett had some powers, but they're different than the powers that Jaime Reyes has. And so that's something that was bugging me, is like, why did Dan have this and Jaime has that? And so in Scarab War, we addressed that, where the Scarab, Kajida, was damaged by the Pharaoh, Khafre, so much so that it took him decades to recover. So the reason that Dan has a limited power set is because Kajida was damaged by the Blood Scarab, basically. So that's my contribution to the retcon.
Well done. I love it. No, that sounds great, man. This is the alternate cover to Blue Beetle 6, which just came out a week or so ago.
Oh, yeah, it looks so good.
I loved it, and that's why I picked it rather than the traditional cover. But, that was the end to the Scarab War, or at least for now, where things are with the Scarab War. A very interesting moment as well. But in the process, and especially early on in your run, Ted Kord gets hurt, mortally hurt. And
definitely.
Booster has to kind of pull him out of the time stream, it seems, and hide him. And, God, I loved seeing the JLA International, helping Jaime get through it, going, all right, listen, you don't need to know. Maybe it's better that you don't know from a symbiotic, I would assume, connection to the Blood Scarab. Just know Ted's safe. But that's kind of what is leading up to events in Blue Beetle 7, And I won't
we haven't
spoil.
seen Ted in a minute, so this has
Say it
been
again.
we haven't seen Ted since issue 2, I guess. So this will be our return to Ted Cord and kind of what's he been up to. People have been asking in the miniseries, even in the story, they're like, "What happened to where is Ted?" And so we're kind of answering that mystery. But you hurt Ted Cord, the whole JLI comes running because the last time this happened, we got a whole Infinite Crisis out of it. So it's like it was such a thrill to write like Fire and Ice and Guy Gardner and like Booster. Booster's a big part of the Keith Giffen tribute issue. Yeah. But he's great. It was a real thrill to actually use him a little bit.
Well, and again, as you say, I mean, Ted was such an important part of JLI. And again, the events of Infinite Crisis. And even, I know there were other moments where like Ted got overweight, had a heart condition, and couldn't actively be a superhero for a while.
Oh, yeah. Someone made a joke, and I think it's funny, so I'll repeat it. But Ted basically gets out of the hospital bed to walk to the next hospital bed. And
for real.
Boy can't get a break. And I'm part of that problem. So I apologize, all you Beetle heads out there. But I love him. You just got to put him through his paces.
And in contrast, tell me about Ted's sister.
Yeah, so we introduce her to the continuity. So in the movie that came out around the time our first miniseries happened, which I love the movie, but of course I'm going to say that. But also I love the movie. So
okay, good.
Susan Sarandon is playing Ted Cord's sister, Victoria Cord. She's like his older sister. She's a little shady. She's more like a ruthless businesswoman, very much in like a Lex Luthor vein or Amanda Waller even. And she doesn't exist in the comics at all until we put her in our story.
Sure.
So DC was like, we have this character. Do you have any interest in using Victoria Cord? And I'm like, you mean I get to give Ted Cord a sister? Like, that's great. Because I love Ted, but he hasn't had a big supporting cast since his book, the Len Wein book in the 80s.
That's
and
right.
I'm like, anything to fill out his cast and Jaime's cast, and like, let's make it a big, stronger story. So, our Victoria is a little different than Susan Sarandon. She hasn't gone masks off supervillain. She's really pragmatic. I think that's what separates her from Ted. Ted's very idealistic, and she's pragmatic to the point of maybe being a little ruthless. And so I love the idea that like maybe he's the thing that's keeping her from going over the edge. But in Scarab War, we're in a situation where he's not around.
Right, absolutely. No, I look forward to her further involvement, and again, without spoiling, because I've as I said, I've since read Blue Beetle 7, which again is coming out everybody in March. Is it fair to say you're not done with more Ted Cord content?
Oh no, we've got plenty of more Ted stuff coming up. So he's gonna don't want to spoil issue 7, but he will. Ted's coming. There's a lot of Ted stuff coming. A lot of Cord stuff. I'll say. We go deep. We go deep into the back issues in our Scarab War arc, but we maybe do one more little thing with the Cord legacy. I want to say because they're such an interesting characters. There wasn't a grand plan to this necessarily, but like Ted Cord's uncle Jarvis was a mad scientist who killed Dan Garrett. Then Ted became the Blue Beetle. Then in Forever Evil, with which Jeff Johns wrote, he kills off Ted Cord's father by Ultraman, the evil Superman from the Crime Syndicate universe. And so the Cords have had their life turned upside down by all this superhero, supervillain stuff. And so Ted's like, I'm going to become a hero. And Victoria's like, I don't know about that.
That's great, man. And also, I really love how you're playing Ted as the mentor to Jaime and everything. And I think that's great. And also Booster as well. I really do love how both of them are like older brothers to Jaime and really kind of, I mean, Booster in his fuck up sort of way. I mean,
yeah, Booster's the uncle who's giving you a beer, right? Like he's.
That's good. I love that. That's great, man. No, and again, I think it's great that they are important parts of the way you're telling Jaime's story, and that I mean, again, it's hey, Jaime's the the name on the title and everything. It's
Sure.
his book. But I do love that they're so important in the story and everything.
Oh, sure. It's a family book, right? It's like, I guess families can read it, but I mean, it's a book about like that extended family of like the Blue Beetle legacy, and then what that mean for Justice League International, what does that mean for the main Justice League, and like everything in between. And so like, just like, it's a real thrill to get to use this cast of characters. And like, I never in a million years thought they'd let me do any of the stuff I've done in Graduation Day or Scarab War. We bring back some pretty obscure characters in my minis, and then it's this Keith Giffen issue. We go all over the map, and we bring back characters that don't exist anymore for the story.
Well, and that's the thing. It's a very loving tribute to Keith. That if you know Keith's history and the characters that he created, were so important to their contributions to the DC universe, I think you guys succeed. I don't know if there's any text pieces that are also included in the book. I pretty much just got the story and the covers. But
not as far as I know, unfortunately. I do have a reading list. I don't know if you have a way to share that in the show notes or something, but I can definitely give you that if you'd like.
Oh, send it to me. That'd be great.
Yeah. So it's kind of, it's not required reading, but like it helps if you're like, what was going on in the Legion of Superheroes in this particular moment? Like now you
without spoiling a lot, Jaime is going to be doing a lot of time jumping in this search for Ted. And it's great to see these like various moments in Keith Giffen stories and stuff. So that's terrific. Chris asks, is this live? It absolutely is live, sir. So I'm glad you're joining us, Chris. I appreciate it. And you were kind to say you love the show as well. Another Josh. In recent years, we've kind of gone away from writers doing the same books for years and years. If it were all up to you, how long would you like to stay on this run before going to another character?
Oh man, I'm sure every writer would say this, but I mean it. Like, I want to do an Ultimate Spider-Man run for Jaime. Like, give me 100 issues. I'm like this character can go anywhere. He has connection to every corner of the DC universe. We do that a little bit in Scarab War. We go to the Oblivion Bar with all the magic characters.
Yes,
space aliens. Black Condor from the Freedom Fighter shows up. Like all these things. And so, like, there's no limit to the stories you can tell with Jaime. We just live in a weird market right now, right, where the books have to refresh or revamp every 12 issues or 6, whatever it is. So, I'll write them forever if they let me.
Well, again, you're smart, Josh, because you're 7 issues into this current run. I know you had Graduation Day prior. Was that your first Jaime arc?
Yeah, that was my first Jaime arc. Comics take for. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
I was just going to say, how many different iterations of Blue Beetle have you done?
Oh, so let's see. This will be issue 7, so that's 6 before. So this is our 13th issue of Blue Beetle.
All right, good.
Forever, actually, compared to in this day and age.
No, and I get it. Yeah, and forgive me. So yeah, what were you going to say?
No, I was just like, I've been maybe not in the queue, but hoping to write Jaime for about 6 years now or longer. And so I did a book for Boom called Dodge City. It was a kids dodgeball book. And they read that, an editor at DC read that, and they're like, you'd be really good for Jaime. You have a very similar voice for the main character. And so they're like, we're going to try to set something up. Well, you know how things go at publishers. You blink and everyone's changed hats or don't work in the same office anymore, whatever it is. And so I thought that was going to go to the wayside. This is a longer story. So
I love it.
DC had this competition called the DC Round Robin a few years later. And so it was basically creative teams with characters competing for whose pitch was going to make it to the finish line and get greenlit as a miniseries. So that was like my in. Was like, okay, Josh, this is how you're going to do it. You're going to win this competition. And this was hard because the fans vote. And so you're online every day. Please vote for us. Please vote for us. And you're competing with your friends sometimes.
Sure.
And it's like, and against characters you like. I remember, I think the first round we were up against Night Runner. He's a Batman Incorporated character. He does like a parkour. He's French. He's really cool. And so I was like, oh man, this is easy. Everyone likes Blue Beetle. No one knows who Night Runner is. And then I was like, but I want to read that book. Oh, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like, it's a bummer. So I was convinced that we might have sailed through because we had a good bracket. You know, it's that. And so I was like, we got a pretty good bracket. We have a chance to get pretty far. We got to the final four. We lost to Suicide Squad. There happened to be a movie coming out, and you can't beat Harley Quinn, so I get it. But I thought that was the end of it. I thought that was my brush with Blue Beetle. And
Sure.
Then maybe a year and a half later, DC calls me up and they're like, you know, we want to do something with the character. There's this movie coming out. It's not set in the movie universe, but we want to bring the character back a little bit. And so that's kind of what got me back to doing Jaime. And I was like, I've been writing the character on and off for like 3 years now. So he's my guy.
That's awesome, man. Well, you know, Josh Williamson and Jeremy Adams had nice lengthy runs on The Flash that immediately come to mind that aren't your 12 and out. So I hope that the audience, and I mean, certainly it's great to see in the chat how many Blue Beetle fans clearly there are. So I hope the book so far going into this 7th issue is doing well. And again, this 7th issue is great. It's a great place for people to jump in if you haven't read those prior 6 issues, and it gives you a lot of what you need to know about where Jaime is, and you know, with hints of where he's going too. And it, yeah, man, I really liked it, and I'm thrilled to hear that you know, we're going to get more Ted as well, and really get into the legacy, because that was the thing that I think kept me from reading the initial run, and maybe I just wasn't paying attention to when the original creators were starting the book and everything. So I know Keith was involved in the creation of Jaime, was he not?
Yeah, so Keith was a co-creator of Jaime, and it was him, John Rogers, the co-writer, and then Polly Hamner did the design.
Absolutely.
And then Phil Jimenez drew him first, which is just kind of the funny way that crossover events work. But anyway, but it was basically it's Coley, it was Keith, and it was John. Raphael Albuquerque got involved. A lot of other creators got involved down the line because they did like 36 issues. So it was a huge run for its time. And so, like, you know, Keith has such an ear to history. And when you read the John Rogers run and they're like mentioning like Dan Garrett or pulling this weird oddball thing from the universe or this, and it's like, that was Keith. Like, you can see it immediately. Like, he cared about the DC universe in like a real way.
Did you ever have an opportunity to meet Keith?
No, I'm so bummed about it, honestly. It was one of those, like, you know, just like, I'll get there. And like, I think his death really caught us all by surprise.
Absolutely.
He had that, I'm sure you saw the post on his Facebook page when he passed away, which just shows what a wit he had. But it's like, he died, and then they have him post on Facebook after he died. It says, anything to miss NYCC. And like, oh man, I feel that in my bones. Like, anything to avoid the convention.
You know, I keep saying it since he's passed. I was very fortunate to get him before he just got fed up with conventions. And I mean, I understand. I always say, coming from radio, the worst live assignment radio job you could get was the auto show. Because people are there to see the cars. They're really not there to see you. And they're serving booze. And I can't tell you how many times when a half-lit guy would be hovering over our broadcast table and just blurt out. My good friend who's passed since, Doug Buffone, great linebacker for the Chicago Bears, used to line up next to Dick Butkus. He was going on and explaining what the Bears needed for that year's draft. And this drunk guy just walks up and goes, I love you, Doug. And he looks up and he's like, oh, thanks a lot, pal. That's nice. I'm doing live radio right now. Hang on 1 second, all right? And so he just kept going. And I always say, listen, when comic conventions get like the auto show, stop going to conventions. And clearly that was the case for Keith.
I listened to
I love that.
I listened to your interview with Keith that you reposted after he passed away, and that was really nice because he didn't do a lot of interviews. So I was like hoping he had his own podcast actually before he passed. He did a few episodes of that. You should look that up.
Oh my God! Do you remember the title of it? I didn't know.
I'll pull it up. But
man, yeah. If you think, it'd be great for right now if you could let everybody know. Because God damn it, what what a brilliant man. And enough of the guys that collaborated him, going back to people like Mark DeMatteis and Kevin McGuire. I've had the opportunity to talk to those guys and everybody else who's worked with him through the years.
Oh yeah, you're going to get a kick out of it. So here's the title of it.
Shoot.
Keith Giffen, I'm Not Dead Yet. He did 3 episodes. They're about all sorts of things. They're about his Legion run. They're just kind of about oddball topics. But like, man, such a clever guy. And I was talking to Joanne Starr. She did the Fire and Ice book recently, and that is like that. You can squeeze it, and Keith Giffen pops out of it. She has such a take on that. But I was like, she writes so fearlessly and punchy, and she's not afraid to be mean in a really funny way. And I think that's one of Keith's trademarks, was he never pulled any punches.
That's great, man. I'm going to have to read that Fire and Ice run. That is so great to hear. Yeah, man. No, his wit was incredible. And God, now I can't wait to listen to these podcasts. That's great. I'm glad I got out of what I did back in 2006. And that was because my buddy, Benita Rogers, who worked at Newsarama at the time, is like, the only way you're going to get him is if you are prepared and he answers the phone and says, yeah, let's do it now. And that's exactly what happened. And I'm like, all right, well, I got my walking papers of how to do it. Let me and I was prepared. So luckily we had that fantastic phone conversation back in 2006. Now he's great, man. Stanley agrees. That's a great podcast title. That's fantastic. Another great run. Welcome to Smallville was great. I was sad to learn it was only 6. Yeah, and I know they were working on some sort of Stranger Things kind of style DC story that Keith was going to be a big part of.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I want to say, oh, God damn it. Now I'm blanking again. I hate this, man. Get old. Don't get old, dude. Canadian writer Jeff Lemire was going to write it with him. Yeah, it was something that Lemire were working on. And, never got past the planning stages as I understood it.
Yeah, we have a whole grab bag of artists for this Keith Giffen tribute. We didn't really talk about that, but Lemire was originally very interested to do it, but unfortunately it was just a scheduling thing. But like we have Natasha Bustos, who did the Fire and Ice Welcome to Smallville mini. We have our regular artist, the superstar Adrian Gutierrez. We have Cully Hammer. We have Howard Porter, and then we have Scott Collins. And I mean, honestly, the best letterer in comics, Lucas Gattoni. People don't give their letterers enough credit, but because we're a bilingual book, I really think he deserves his flowers. He's the only guy in the industry, if not the entire world, who's lettering a book in 2 languages.
That's amazing. And I'm so glad that DC made that move because Jaime is a terrific Hispanic character that give the Hispanic community every opportunity to get in on his story. And I really think he works in a way that other attempts at Hispanic, putting Hispanic characters in hadn't. So I think that's great. Dave Hassan says, Lucas quietly the best letterer in the business. He agrees with you. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're watching, David. Thank you. Yeah, man. No, and I wanted to ask you, give me the name of your lead artist again.
Oh, so he's Adrian Gutierrez. He lives in Spain, so he's probably asleep right now. But hi, Adrian, if you watch this later. He's amazing. He's been the artist on every issue of Blue Beetle with me. So it's been the same colorist, Will Quintana, Lucas Gattoni, the letterer, Adrian, the artist, and me, and then our editor, Andrew Marino and Katie Kubert. And so, keeping the same creative team is impossible these days. And I think it's really like a labor of love for all of us to we're the Beatles right now. We're like, we got to stick together. So we're doing that. And then just to let in all these other fresh faces for the book, not only gives Adrian a chance to breathe and really, really get to work on issue 8, but, it's just like a love letter to the character and to Keith. And just I never thought in a million years I'd get to write for Howard Porter or Coley or any of these artists. And so it's a treat.
That's great, man. Excellent. Coley's a good friend, in particular of the people that you mentioned. Gutierrez, I felt during the Scarab War, there is kind of a Giffen vibe to his art. Am I just imprinting that on it, or would you agree?
He's leveled up so much since the rough pages we were doing for that round robin competition 3 years ago or so. And it just shows like what a monthly book can do for a talent like that, how quickly he learns and how much like his facial expressions are getting into McGuire territory, you know, it's so expressive and so smart, the choices he's making. And like, it's so funny because like, you know, I turned in the scripts originally and like, we'd have a little bit of back and forth, but it was mostly like kind of a little bit more writer led, I want to say, just because of like, I think we were both a little sheepish.
Okay.
And now Adrian's like, I've got some big ideas for this page. And I'm like, thank God.
That's excellent.
Please. Like he makes things shine. And like, I really try to write a detailed script for him, and he comes back with ideas to bounce off of that. And like, it's a true collaboration. And it's like, it's crazy. He lives on the other side of the world.
That's fantastic. And does he speak good English?
Oh, he speaks great English. Yeah. He's like, he's buddies with like Bruno Redondo, who does with Nightwing and all. He's part of that whole like kind of class of artists.
That's cool. That's excellent. No, man, again, I love how you're building out both the magic and the sci-fi stuff of Jaime and the characters you're introducing, and again expanding that DC cosmic world with the various Beetles as they're represented. And also, I love seeing Starfire in the.
Oh yeah, Starfire's my girl. You know, it's funny when I started because she was always part of the pitch, like. So when I started to do Graduation Day miniseries or Round Robin, Starfire was always part of the equation. And people would say, why? They've interacted before, Starfire and Jaime Reyes in the past. They were, you know, he was on the Titans and they interacted a little bit in space. And so they were never close. There wasn't like a dynamic there. And so I saw something there because I was, you know, that Teen Titans Go cartoon that's like on Cartoon Network like 24 hours a day. So the actress who plays Starfire, I met her at a convention years ago before I was writing Blue Beetle. And I was like, oh, I love your Starfire. Like, you add so much depth to her, but she's kind of fun and ditzy. And she's like, Starfire's not ditzy. She's like very much adamant about this. And she's like, you know how some people are street smart? Starfire is space smart. And she's not in space right now. So this is all new to her. But if you put her on the moon, she's the most dangerous person on that. You know what I mean? The most skilled and dangerous and smart person there. And so I loved that take on her. And like, so Ted Kord's like his Jaime's guide to kind of this greater hero world. And Starfire's kind of a guide to like a lot of these ethical questions he's tackling with, because she has so much empathy, but also this like cosmic destiny of his that like Ted just isn't a part of.
I understand. No, and that's terrific. And also, it brings that gravitas back to Starfire that honestly I felt she lost during the New 52. I didn't like the way she was being written. And a lot of other people pointed to how she was over-sexualized, it seemed, during that one writer's run, or at least his introduction to her in the New 52 status quo. And the Titans didn't seem to remember their own history and stuff. And it's like, my problem was Corey was more grounded, even though she was an alien during the Wilfred Perez years, during God, was it 50? Yeah, during 52. Mm-hmm. You know, I loved her being with Animal Man's family, and you know, I thought that was great. And you know, Mrs. Baker, Buddy's wife, is just like, we got a teenage-year-old kid, and you got this sci-fi bombshell living with us right now. Maybe not the best idea, and that made me laugh. But it's like, let's not forget, Corey is a founding, or I should say, New Teen Titans founding member as far as that era goes, and she should be smart and space smart, as you say. So no, I think that's great, man.
No, she's such a great character, and like I use her as much as humanly possible without getting in Tom Taylor's way. And I love the characters. You know, she's the Titan. We have the big events should happen in Titan, but we have a lot of fun with her. And like, I just love to give her that gravitas, like you were saying. She reminds me of like, it's not the exact same, but like, you know, like Storm is I think a comp for that, and that kind of like that majesty, right? Like Corey is royalty, and she's a warrior, and she's so powerful. They always downplay it, I feel like, in the books, but we really try to like show what an A-list talent she is.
Absolutely. First of all, Cully Hamner watching us, which is
hey, how are you?
I don't know if you're going to Terrificon this year. A lot of our friends are coming back, and it'd be great to hang out with everybody. But also Lego Monster says, I like that with Tom Taylor's Titans and Beast World in your run. Starfire is getting the respect she deserves.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
No, I'm really liking the Titans run. I'm a little behind on Beast World, which is bad of me because I don't know. It's always like we're our own book in some ways. We're kind of off to the side because we have our own city. We have Palmyra City, which we introduced to the DC universe, and it's like I always say that if Sinestro has a new belt buckle, we don't have to talk about it in my book. You know what I mean? Like whatever, if the status quo changes a little bit, we don't have to worry about it so much. But like obviously, if like the sky turns green, like we'll probably do something there.
Here, Cully says I only did a few pages in 7, but Josh, so much fun. That's great, man. That's great to hear.
So, no, a complete dream, honestly. Like again, all these moments. I have. Speaking of Blue Beetle 7 from the John Rogers Keith Giffen run. I have an unused cover design by Rafael Albuquerque, and so I bought it for maybe like $25 on eBay when the book was coming out, and so I still have it. And so I'm like, I keep waiting to find a convention where we're both at it, so I can have him sign it or something. But like,
that's great.
I've been Team Jaime for such a long time, and like it feels like this weird, it just feels right.
Well, and also, unfortunately, the release of the movie, the current status quo didn't do the movie that many favors as far as theatrical. Well, I don't even know. Did it come out? Yeah, it came out theatrically.
Yeah, it came out. Yeah,
of course it did. But, I mean, again, we're in a weird moment, and it's a shame that a lot of the DCEU reached kind of leftover status even before a lot of these things were released. And so everyone's excited about James Gunn, and it's like, yeah, but you still got Jaime, you still got other things in the pipeline. Even Shazam 2 was part of that, and Aquaman 2. So it's a shame, but I'm glad that people still dug the movie as they did.
Yeah, people really have found it, I will say, and like I love the movie obviously, but like people really gravitate towards it. It feels like a perfect kind of like sleepover movie. You know what I mean? Like I like if I was a kid and like it was at the video store, I'd rent that movie like every weekend forever. And it's so funny. And the lead actor Jolo, he's a fan of the book, which means a lot to me. But more importantly, he's the best possible casting you could get for that role. He is the perfect, and that's James Gunn said he's going to keep him around in some capacity. So I'm really excited to see what that means.
Yeah, that's what I was leading to as well, that it's great to hear that despite that leftover status, that James recognizes the value of the performance and the character. And I think that's great because, yeah, I mean, again, I remember, I don't think they ever use Jaime in Smallville, the TV show?
He's in an episode of Smallville, and he looks like, I hate to say, I don't want to knock anyone's special effects at the time, but he looks like a box of wine. And it's a good episode. The actor, I don't know his name offhand. He's really good in it, but the plot's a little silly. It's a Booster episode too. So actually, I like their Booster a lot. But I love Smallville. So at the time, I didn't think anything of it. But I went back and rewatched the episode to do research for the book.
Sure.
And I was like, this costume is silly. Like this is a little hokey, but it doesn't do Coley's design justice at all.
I hear you, man, and it's a shame because not only the Smallville episode then, but I do remember seeing a proof of concept short little promo film that was out there.
Oh, I do remember seeing that on like online or leaked or at a convention or something.
Exactly. Yeah, man. That's David says the Smallville costume looks like it came directly from a Power Rangers set 10 years prior. Yeah, man, absolutely. What are you going to do? Stanley wants to know, Josh, do you admire and follow any other comic writers?
Oh, yeah. I'm pretty – I have a lot of friends who are in comics. You can't help but do it, I think, if you do. I've been – like I said, I was listening to Word Balloon when I was an intern at Dark Horse, and that was 17 years ago, 15 years ago, a while ago. Ow. So I've made some friendships since then. But, the ones that I really admire are – I'm so jealous of people who get to do those long runs with characters. But beyond that, like Hickman, I'm really excited to read his Ultimate Spider-Man run and what that's going to mean for that character. I I really like Christos Gage or like Zeb Wells or like any of those creators I came up with. But today, like Steve Fox is really good. James Tynan, obviously, he's killing it and taking over the world. And just kind of odds and ends. Joanne Starr, Jetsia Axelrod. Now I'm just naming names, but there's so much talent right now. There just aren't enough books, it feels like.
I agree, man. Man, Lego Monster, you're like literally a minute behind me, but otherwise we must have some sort of ESP link because you immediately are asking, do you remember that DC? This is what we're talking about, that DC Nation Blue Beetle short that was supposed to be a concept for a show or film. I remember seeing it when I was little and was super excited for it, thought it was real. I think it was real, and again, I think you're right. I think they were shopping it around, hoping to have it latch on as either a TV show or a movie, and that's why it is so great that Gunn is going to, hang on to what's in the movie and move it forward. Cully says, back to words for me, fellas, or work, I assume. But I wanted to poke my head in and give my regards. I'll see you both on the circuit. Cully, apparently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and apparently I will see him at Terrificon, so that's great. Got to get ready for karaoke with him. We had a good time doing that at Terrificon.
Oh my God! No, DC and Warner Brothers have always really been committed to Jaime Reyes since they came up with them. Like, I think he was in Smallville like less than 2 years after he debuted in the comics, and like, so they've always had an eye. They're like, this guy is destined for big things, and I don't think they're, even if the movie did, kind of okay money wise, like I think they're in it for the long haul.
I agree, and again, I think he is getting traction where other attempts to create various Hispanic heroes hadn't been as strong. I love Fire too, and I'm really glad that she's back in that Fire and Ice miniseries as well. Here, let's see here. Yeah, Cully's excited. We'll do more Sinatra when we karaoke. Absolutely, man. We did Come Fly With Me. Infer, love your costume designs in general, Cully. Oh, that's nice.
Oh yeah,
yeah, indeed. No, it's a great design. It's very unique. I mean, they really incorporating the Scarab and making it armor, but not in that Iron Man or X Man of War kind of design. If I'm saying the Valiant character correctly.
No, it's such a clever. It's so clever and it's like very thoughtful about like the character works in so many different ways, and the costume design is so iconic. And like you look at like Dan Garrett or Ted Kord, and you're like, okay, I kind of see how this is the successor to that, but it really feels like it has its own identity. Absolutely,
and again, putting that artificial intelligence or whatever magic version of that in Jaime's head and everything, I think is great. It's fun too seeing Jaime in the armor dealing with Skeets and Booster in in issue 7. So we have issue 7 to look forward to, everybody. Now, before we wrap, you were, and again, you'll forgive me because when it comes to the X-Men, I am so behind, and I get to runs way after the fact. I am just reading Hickman's whole House of X, Power of X, all that stuff on my Marvel Unlimited app, while I'm also reading the Ultimate Universe stuff. But did you have a run at in the X-Men?
No, not yet, man.
Okay.
I've written it. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, you said you were on an X-Men podcast, so I assumed.
Oh no. It's just the I was on the Cerebro podcast with Connor Goldsmith, and so I was just on because I'm a comics dude, and also he's a friend of mine. So I have gotten to write. I wrote Iceman and North Star and North Star's husband once for a Hulkling and Wiccan comic. So I've written X-Men, but I haven't written the X-Men.
I'm with you. Yeah, so Hulkling and Wiccan, fantastic characters that that came out of Young Avengers and everything, and I've loved their evolution since being introduced way back. So that's cool. That's great.
Yeah, they're great characters, and they're fans, man. I mean, they love those characters so much, and they know them front to back, and like they've been so kind about my work on it, and like
awesome.
It's a good time to be fans of those characters. There's a lot of like really talented writers out there who are kind of getting a chance to play with them.
I completely agree, man. No, and it's great that the publishers are recognizing that potential audience and putting characters, diverse characters like that in the spotlight. I think it's terrific. There is plenty of room on the shelf for everybody. And
I agree.
You know, I mean, unfortunately, some of the critics that are like, "Well, I like my characters," and it's like, that's fine, that's cool, they're there, no one's taking them away, but it's good to expand the universe and really let people see themselves in these other characters and stuff. So
Yeah, this issue 7 is like, it's kind of a blue and gold issue, right? Because it has
oh, yeah.
Jaime and Booster, and like, Ted and Booster they'll always have their little corner of space and time together and their team.
Sure.
And like a lot of the goal of this run was to kind of like find Jaime his own place in the DC universe that really is like his territory. And so hopefully we pay that off, and by the end of our run, whenever that is, hopefully in 10 years, people will be like, it's like Coast City or Central City or Gotham or whatever.
Well, again, I think you are using other characters from the DC universe in the right way that only boost Jaime's importance, and they reflect well on him. He reflects well on them in kind. So yeah, I think I think you're doing it right, Josh, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I've enjoyed these first 7 issues. This last issue is coming up, or not last, but more the next issue is coming up again, mid-March, March 12th or March 19th.
I think it's the 12th, but
There you go.
Check your local listings, I guess.
Oh, okay. And then, yeah, all right. I guess Infer wants a little more information on your take on Booster and Jaime's relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's kind of like an uncle relationship, right? It's like he's not your dad. He's maybe not even your dad. He's like your dad's best friend, right? And he's like he has your back, but like also you're not his responsibility. You know what I mean? He's like he'll slip you a beer at the family party behind the garage, or like he'll give you some really bad relationship advice. But like Booster just not equipped to do that. It short circuits him to try to be like a good mentor and a good like a loving friend and like all this stuff. Like, and so like I think that's kind of the dynamic is like, when you're like a teenager and you meet an adult that just doesn't have it together, and you're like, oh, I figured this out maybe a little bit better than you are. I think sometimes that's Jaime and Booster, but Booster's kind of cleaned up his act in recent years, so I don't want to say anything to get the Booster heads after me.
No, but I hear you, man. No, and Booster has to fuck up every now and then. As much as
it's what makes him so charming. Yeah,
absolutely, man, and with the best intentions. Again, yeah, believe me, man. I've had this conversation with Jurgens time and time again.
Oh,
have you? I was going to say, have you talked to Dan?
No, I would love to talk to Dan Jurgens about Ted and Booster. That blue and gold book is good, and also he did a Dan Garrett thing way back when. I think it was for Convergence or some crossover. There's one where all the Beatles show up together. They're all these crossovers kind of blur in my head, but it's one of those things. So
I'm sorry,
he's a fan of the history. What I want to see him do, I want him to fold in Victoria Cord, Ted's sister, because she hasn't existed up to this point. And I think she would really throw a wrench in blue and gold. But that's not my story to tell. That's all Dan.
I understand. Lego Meister wants to know what other DC characters would you like to eventually write?
Oh, man. Let's see. All of them. But it's let's see. Tim Drake and Stephanie Brown would be a big one for me. I'm a '90s kid, so like the Robin and Spoiler are like it for me.
Sure.
Beyond that, I'd love to do more with Starfire. Like I said, we try to give Tom Taylor a lot of space to tell that story. And so I'd love to get a chance to just tell like what does our Starfire story look like for us. But like JSA characters, like I said, I love the legacy stuff. I'm sure you picked up on that as you're reading the first run. And so any of those legacy heroes are really exciting to me. Oh, you know who I like? Bunker. Do you know Bunker? He was a Titan. He's like a new 52 Teen Titan. He makes energy bricks. He's kind of like they're kind of constructs. But I did a short with him for the holiday special this past year. Oh, wow. And Andrew Drillin's the artist. He did an incredible job. We did a redesign for the character. He's a Latino hero. He's gay. He's from Mexico. And he's got this cool power set. And I saw him and I'm just like, there's so much potential here. Like he just needs a mini series. You know what I mean? Like he just needs a little bit of the spotlight. And I feel that way about 100 characters.
That's great to hear, man. And honestly, all of you creators that were on those anthology Valentine's Day holiday specials.
Mm-hmm.
Those 10-page stories, I give you guys and women so much credit because you really told full stories in 10 pages. And it really impressed the hell out of me because that's as the real estate of single issues it contracts and expands, pulling off 10 pages is a tall order, I think. And you all have succeeded. Those things are a pleasure to read. And
mine always feel stuffed. Yeah, I'm always like, we only have 10 pages, so let's try to get as much in there as humanly possible. But I do the same thing now. The big 2 books are 20 pages, so it's like you got it. People are like, "Oh, I'm not doing double page spreads anymore," and I'm like, "I am." And we do quite a few of them. We do you may have seen the Madame Xanadu one that Adrian did in issue 3.
Yes,
it's incredible work. I was like, that's the comic book art form. Like, we can't lose splash pages.
I hear you, man. And again, the way you brought in the Oblivion Bar and Madame Xanadu and Tracy 13 and all of that. Honestly, every cameo and supporting appearance, I'm just like, oh, that's great. Oh, there you go. There she is. There he is. I haven't thought about them in a minute.
Yeah,
it's great to see him. So yeah, man. No, really, Josh, I think you're killing it, and everyone is going to really be pleased with issue 7 of Blue Beetle, which again comes out on March 12th. And it's a great tribute to Keith Giffen, and it's an all-star group of artists, but I think it's terrific. So I appreciate what you're doing, man, and continued success. I think you're killing it.
Oh, no, thank you so much. I hope to come back someday. We'll do some Trujillo tapes, and we'll...
Well, and I'll do my Keith Giffen podcast listening in the meantime. But absolutely,
you have to check it out. He's so funny.
You are welcome back if there's a significant moment coming up in the Beetle run or you get a new title. Please let me know. And pointing everyone to the Abrams books of Washington's Gay General. And am I saying it properly? I don't want to. All right, very good, cool. That sounds great. And congratulations, dude. Keep it up.
Yeah, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Taking Tuesday off, but on Wednesday, everybody. I hope you'll join me. I hope you've been cool with the fact that I've been kind of going up through my own history broadcast-wise, and I've had a lot of radio friends on. And my dear friend George Hoffman has this amazing sports podcast called Tell Me a Story I Don't Know. And it's a great one-on-one interview podcast with a lot of great sportscasters. George is coming on because he's transcribed a lot of his interviews into a book. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about our broadcast history together. We worked together for 10 years at one station and then another 4 years at a different station. But, and also just where sports are. I mean, God, you think comic books are screwed up in their way and everything. Sports is screwed up as well. And I would love to talk to George and get his point of view on what's happening and stuff. So I hope everyone will join us. Until next time, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.